What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel, guys and girls. My name is Samuel and I am reviving this channel as I begin to enter college at Duke University to provide you guys with some raw, sort of entertaining and definitely some helpful videos that detail not only my life at the university, but also give you guys some tips and tricks about what you should be doing in high school to make your application stronger for these universities, as well as what I believe I did right to be admitted to the schools, etc., etc., etc. So starting out with a video I've been wanting to make all summer, I'm going to start a multi-part series about what I did to be admitted into Duke and how you guys can do the same to get into other top 10 universities, including the Ivies, Duke, and then MIT, UChicago, all of them, as well as some tips and tricks that you've probably never heard before, because at this point, I'm sure you've heard mostly the same stuff. Specifically, today's video is going to cover more of the quantitative. So that's going to include the GPA, standardized test scores, SAT subject test scores, as well as AP tests. So make sure you guys subscribe right now if you want to see more of this content. Later in this series is going to be extracurriculars, essays, letters of rec, interviews, etc., as well as my life at Duke. I'm going to be doing move-in vlogs, tours of the school, etc., etc., etc. So I'm going to start this off with GPA. The GPA is an ongoing process. It begins in 9th grade and it ends at the end of 12th grade, right? It's the component of your application that you technically spend the most time on because it covers all 4 years. So if you think that it's going to be an important component in the application process, you're right. But think about it like this. Most kids with a shot at getting into these selective universities all have extremely high GPA. They all took hard classes and they all succeeded in them. So a lot of times the GPA differentiation can be a lot larger at less selective universities like the big public schools, whereas it might hold slightly less weight at top universities just because students are so close to each other. And when you look at GPAs, a lot of times outside factors can come into play, like how difficult the school is or any outside personal factors in your life. So it probably wouldn't come as a shock to know that schools do care more about just your GPA. So a lot of times I hear that people have lower GPAs and they're worried they don't want to apply because they see all these people applying with 4.0s, but don't let that discourage you. It is not the sole most important factor in every application for every one of the top schools. Remember that the application process really is holistic. They look at more than just your GPA. They look at tons and tons of factors. So in this video, I'm sure you guys all want to know my GPA. I'm not going to disclose it publicly. I will tell you guys, if you really care that much and you want to message me privately, I'll let you know, and I might reveal it in a later video. I just am not comfortable with it at the time. Just know that I was in the top 2% of my class and I was not a valedictorian. But again, my GPA was similar to all of the students who applied, so I don't think that my GPA was one of the bigger factors that influenced my decision. On to arguably the most dreaded component of your application, and that's standardized test scores. That's the SAT and that's the ACT. Good news is that as of recent, schools are placing less weight on these tests for admission to their university. Even Duke themselves just came out with a report saying that they no longer require the essay component of these tests when you submit them. Bad news for some, good news for others, because some are good at tests, but they do still have weight in the application process. Again, I'm going to keep my ACT score private, which is the test I ended up submitting. I submitted the ACT. I did score on the top 1%, so if you look at the percentiles, you can pretty much tell around what my score was. And I am in no way bragging because that was my 3rd overall attempt. I did a horrible SAT. I took a pretty bad ACT the first time, and that's after countless hours of studying to learn the format of the test, the types of questions, and I think really that's what it's about. You need to know the test well, and I'm not just talking about the knowledge. You need to know the formats, you need to know the types of questions each of the tests asks, you need to know the timing, how much time you have for each component of the test, etc. If you want me to make a separate video detailing the ways that I studied, because I studied a lot and I ended up finding a routine that kind of worked for me personally, I will, but as of right now, obviously this video is going to be too long already. And so that's why I actually recommend taking legitimate practice tests for both the SAT and the ACT, which you can find on their websites. That way you can familiarize yourself with the types of questions that they're going to be asking. You can see which one is harder just to read and comprehend. For me, the SAT was a lot more confusing, just the types of questions they asked. But the good news is that, you have a lot more time to do it. The ACT I found to be more straightforward, but you really had to crank it out because there were more questions, there was less time. So yeah, these tests are important. I'd recommend trying to get within the usual accepted range by the universities. Unfortunately, if you're applying to the top caliber schools, that's going to include, for the ACT, probably around 33, 36. And then the SAT probably high 1400s to obviously 1600. But I personally know, honestly, a pretty good portion of kids who scored way lower on those and they still got admitted into some crazy good universities. So I know a lot of times you dread it because the standardized test portion of your application is weaker. don't let that discourage you. Again, it's not the sole factor they look at. A lot of times it can be overlooked if you do really well on the other components of your application. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about SAT subject tests and AP scores. So SAT subject tests aren't really known by many because they're not a big factor, but many of the top universities do actually recommend them. Here's the thing. Recommend means required. Take 2 subject tests in the subjects you know well and send them in. Too many freak out about the percentiles they get, because I think, for example, math 2, if you score perfectly, if you get an 800, you're only in the top 20% of test takers. So when kids get scores like 760 or 780, which are excellent scores, they think they've screwed themselves because they're already in a much lower percentile. They have not screwed themselves. These are still excellent scores. The schools know that. They just want to see that you have proficiency in a few subjects. I think that's really what it's about. This was actually one of the sketchier components of my application, and for the sake of clarity, I'm going to tell you my scores. So I ended up taking US history and Spanish, and I got a 780 in US history, which was excellent. I was honestly surprised I got that score. I kept that, but then I ended up getting a 710 on Spanish. Keep in mind that I had been learning Spanish at that point for 13 years, so I was extremely fluent, and I got a 710, which was only around the 50th percentile. So obviously, I was doing some research online, and the internet will just crush your hopes and dreams. They told me, I had no chance anymore. I couldn't have retaken it at that point because it was already October, it was too late. But guess what? In the end, it didn't really matter. So if you have a lower score, even one that's maybe in the 600s, send it in. Don't let a dumb subject test be the reason you don't apply to one of these schools, because it has much less weight than some of the other components of your application. And here's where EP scores come in. Many students and many teachers, many whatever, say not to send them in because schools don't look at them. Some schools actually don't look at them to, weigh your application, yada, yada, yada. I sent mine in. By the summer going into senior year, I had only taken 3 AP tests because my school didn't offer that many. I ended up getting 5s on all of them because I had a ton of time to study, and I figured it would just be safer to send them in than to hold them back. Maybe they were considered and maybe they weren't, but who knows? Maybe that 710 I got on Spanish was overlooked because I ended up getting a 5 on the Spanish language test. Again, I could be 100,000% wrong, but I figure if you have a score that you're happy with, send it in. It's not gonna hurt at all. If anything, it's only gonna help. Some of you might be questioning whether to send in a 3 or a 2, and that's really an individual decision at that point. I personally would never send in a 2 because that's not passing, and I'm guessing that's not gonna look very well for the Ivy League schools and for the top 10 schools. And I might consider sending in a 3 if the test you took, the percentiles were much lower, meaning that a lot less kids got 5s and 4s. But it's up to you. I think the important part is to try not to stress about this component because it really is not as important as your essays, as your GPA and your ACT, SAT scores. So submit what you think will best represent you as an applicant. And that's really individual. It's hard to tell if you guys want to message me privately and ask for yourselves. I can give you some guidance, but again, it really comes down to your personal preferences. So that's all I got for you in the first part of the series. I'm sure some of these parts were repetitive and maybe some parts you didn't want to hear. But I truthfully meant everything I said, and I hope that you take some of this information to heart when you're sending in your apps to school. Again, please consider subscribing if you enjoy the content. Tons and tons of more videos about not just Duke, but the application process as well are going to be coming in the very near future as I leave in literally 36 hours. And again, unless this video is heavily criticized, I'm going to consider making more parts. The next part will be the non-quantitative aspects of your application, which include essays, letters of rec, all of that good stuff. But I'm leaving that up to you guys. So if you want to see it, you have to comment down below, and I obviously am going to be looking at all the comments. All right, guys, that's it for now. I'll see you in the next one.